Cool, and we're recording now. Perfect. Well, thanks for taking the time to be here. I know we had a bit of conversation offline, but I thought let's just hit record because there's probably a bunch of stuff for us to get into.
Yes, we could probably have a whole offline conversation, but so happy to meet you and connect and super excited. Thank you for having me.
I noticed your wall, by the way, is that peppercorn, the color.
The
It
oh,
looks similar because I just bought paint like to redecorate my like literally these walls here, and I bought a color that's very similar to that.
did you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know exactly what it's called, but I will say it is chalkboard paint.
Okay.
And so it's like a, you know what, it might be like a moon something or another, something with the moon.
Yeah.
But it's really wonderful. I actually, it's become my like vision boarding wall. I like my room is pretty
Amazing.
like lovely, but if I have ideas or like something, I'll just write it,
Yeah. Yeah.
write up, write it on the chalkboard wall.
No, I
But
love
you
that.
just bought paint too.
Yeah, literally, I bought paint too, and then you've got your chair, and then you've got your plant. Like literally, that this is exactly how I'm going to be doing up this room
Oh,
because it hasn't been redecorated. It hasn't been
oh,
redecorated in so
perfect.
long. Yeah, to create, you need to. I don't know if you, especially if you're quite creative, you need to create a space that makes you feel inspired and
Yes.
allows you to just feel relaxed. I guess because yeah, if you're not feeling kind of relaxed and grounded, then it's very difficult to channel anything or to allow anything to come through that's quite authentic.
Yes, that's very true. I've talked about like sometimes I think about because I'm pretty like organized and everybody's different, but I'm pretty like organized person and like my mom is like super clean and so I've learned to be very like tidy, but the creative like side of me is like I just need like a small mess.
Yeah,
Just like a little bit of a small disaster for just a little bit and then I'll clean it up. We'll be fine. And but yeah, so like having that balance of like creating a space that is inspiring order, like having things in order definitely helps, but still feels like artistic or creative. So
basically chaos within a structure. Like that's what it
uh,
needs to be.
structured chaos, yes, just a little
Yeah.
bit. Yes. So this wall on occasion it will like be clean and then sometimes it will have just like a splatter of all kinds of different things. So I'll try to keep it to a minimum, but yes, it's good.
S-
It's helpful for the creative process for sure.
Yeah, I think definitely you have to have kind of freedom in the creative process. But we were talking about pronunciation of names, and I wanted to start there. And I think your name pronounced Svrcina is quite interesting because I have no clue where it's from in the world. So I'd love to kind of hear about that and kind of your background in that sense.
Yes, totally. Well, yes, love a good pronunciation. And so Sur-Cee-Nah is my last name. And it is like I'm from Dearborn, Michigan originally, so I'm from the United States. But my as far as what I've gathered, my family heritage is like Czech and German, like a little bit of Bulgarian, Austrians, kind of like a mixture of things, but primarily Czech and German.
Amazing. Wow. Okay. So a few different
Yes.
places around Europe. Have you visited any of those places?
I have been to Germany. I've been to London in the UK, which is like that's it's not the same. Like you're part of mainland Europe, but I've spent actually a couple months in Berlin for like a creative exploration. So I've been there, but as far as like Czech or Austria or anywhere else, it was pretty concentrated to like Berlin. I went to Cologne and then Hamburg in Germany, and that was it so far. But it does feel like a second home. I'm like part of my whole spirit was like, oh my lord, I feel like I'm home. So yeah.
Well, and then so you were born in Michigan, like that's where you were born and brought up, and like your kind of, I guess, culture and way of living kind of shaped by that.
Yes. So I mean, I was born in Dearborn, Michigan, which is just a little bit outside of Detroit. And then I did end up moving to. I have one older brother, and he is just a couple years older than me. So right before we ended up moving to Nashville when I was 14. So I've kind of split. I'm 25 now. So I've split like almost 50-50, like Michigan and Nashville. So there's probably those two would be the primary influences. And yeah, so my brother like went off to college and started just off in his career path and his life. And right kind of in that same pocket of time, we ended up moving to Nashville. So um, yeah, just grew up in like the suburbs, and then also the suburbs here in Tennessee. But it's been a great like experience, and love the culture in both places. And I love to like meet new people and go to different places and learn. And that's all kind of influenced like just my perspective and who I am.
I think the more experiences you have, the better it is for the creative process as well, right? Like you can be quite limited in like your inspiration if you just have like the same experiences in terms of the connections of people, the conversations, music, like films, like whatever it is you're interacting with. If it's just like within a box or within a limited kind of space, then I don't know. I think that might hinder your creative process to some extent. I just feel like being exposed to stuff that you may not even necessarily think is inspirational can spark off like ideas and connections for things that you'd never even thought of. Like I don't know how true is that for you and your experience.
Totally. I think that is like such a great word. And I think I mean each person has somewhat of a unique way that they see the world. So then even how like when you do have new experiences, and especially with the creative process, you can have the same experience as somebody else. Like let's say we both took a trip to the Czech Republic and we both like are soaking up the culture in Prague. It's wonderful, but how we both process that might be a little bit different, and how it could pour out into what we do or our creativity or what how we think could be different, which I think is really cool. And I did like it was something that I've kind of thought about recently of how like porous I've been with like soaking up an environment and kind of like incorporating it into my creativity. So for examples, when I was really young, like I fell in love with country music, and nobody in my family listened to country music like at all. But I had one friend that grew up kind of like on her family had like a dairy farm in Michigan, and so it was like very rural, and I loved her. She loved horses, so I was like trying to jump on that train. And then I like totally fell in love with country music just in general, just because I was like a fan. And so that was really my affections for country were honestly like how I got started in like music as a potential career path. And then over the years, like, and obviously I'm not singing country music now, but it influenced the way I sang or like different creative fashion choices. And then just over time, I've kind of like, as I've gotten older and like more mature, I've figured myself out a bit more. I've gone to different places, and soaking up the experience has totally like inspired and factored into the creativity. And one other example of that would be I had gone to uh, China very briefly. It was like a week and a half for a studying abroad trip. Um, and it was literally right before I took my first like writing trip outside of the US. And that experience, of course, was like, I love like people. It was like an international scholar program. And so I was like, there were people from all over the place. I'm like, this is heaven. And so then when I started writing, like after that, there was totally like some Asian influences and like how I would structure melodies or some of the colors or fashion that I was interested in. And so, yeah, I think it's all like, of course, the more experiences you have, it helps for you to continue evolving. And obviously, like wanting to be grounded in who you are, but like embracing and being able to celebrate those experiences and celebrate different like places and culture that you experience is wonderful.
You know what I think's like fascinating and amazing is like if you get a chance to document, like you have, document your artwork or creativity, whatever you want to call it, music, like the stuff that you create. If you get a chance to document that, it's really cool to look back and see where you were in life and kind of what influenced your work at that time, because that is always going to change and evolve. Like imagine looking back at your first album or your first single or like the very first stuff that you wrote down,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of reflective of where you were in life. And I do the same with my writing and the things that I'm creating. I'm look back at my posts or look back at some of my journal notes. I'm like, oh, this is super interesting because it's influenced by all of these things going on. And now I would never write that now because I'm in a completely different like mental, emotional, spiritual place. So like what comes out of me is entirely different as well.
Yeah, that's so cool and so fascinating. And it is interesting how, like, over time with maturity, but to be able to have those benchmarks and like those moments in time and to be able to reflect on what you were thinking and processing and see how that's changed and honestly how it ultimately ends up shaping who you are, even if there's like a couple threads that you pick out that you're like, that was great. And then maybe a couple threads that you're like, I think I could probably toss that in the trash, maybe.
Yeah, there's a few moments where you just look back and you're like, who are you? Who is that?
Like what, I wonder what was like sparking that thought. That was interesting. Yeah, totally. I hear you. I love it.
So where along the journey did your kind of I guess creativity start to grow where it became kind of noticeable? And was it like necessarily music and writing straight away, or were you more creative in a different field altogether, but you kind of experimented and kind of stumbled across it? Like what was that like?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I always love to sing. That is definitely one thing that has, from the time I've been very, very little, that has always been like a thread throughout. I'm like, I literally will sing from the time that I wake up to the time that I go to bed. So there's always something like a new melody of sorts that is overflowing from my spirit. So something is terribly wrong if I'm not singing. So I guess that would be like one form of creative expression that was very young. And I think as far as music goes, there have been like very key moments where uh, somebody would speak into my life and say something that I never really thought about, but that ended up like being very, honestly, very foretelling of what kind of how my life would unfold a little bit with creativity, or like opened my mind to even consider something that I didn't before. But then even like as a young person, I was also very like entrepreneurial, I guess. So I would like we had like a basement in our house, so like a level underneath the main level. And I had like a whiteboard downstairs, and I like had created a library, I had a grocery store, I had a classroom going, and I was like totally content to like run a few different businesses, like I guess have a great time by myself. And so I was like very creative in that way. And then music honestly started. There was one, like when I was 10, I started traveling fairs and festivals, and there was a publisher from Nashville at one of them that was like, hey, I see like a lot of potential in you. Would you be interested in coming to Nashville? And if you would ever consider songwriting, I would love for you to like take a trip to like a writing trip to Nashville. So that really like that moment of coming here to Nashville was like a huge spark that musically started to unleash like all of this creativity. And so I've learned a lot in that space
How old were you at
musically.
that time?
At that time, I was 12, and I had been traveling fairs and festivals like starting at 10. And I signed a publishing and management deal with her at 13. So I was a minor when I signed that. And then that like was of course like the final pushover to move, because at that point I was like working full time and then going to school. So it was like really important to be here. So my family was supportive of that, and I'm forever thankful. And again, my older brother, he was already like launched in, like he knew at a very young age what he like felt very called to do, and so he was already fulfilling and headed in that direction. And so it was like it was a very opportune time to make that leap as well.
Did you ever think twice about whether it was the right thing to do, or you just thought, this is it, like this is just feels like the next natural thing?
I think like at the time in that moment, like I think I was very unaware of a lot, to be honest. I think I didn't really process a lot of things until much later. And that massive of a move and uprooting, like was excited that this was like a new adventure, but I don't think I really understood or had the capacity, like in middle school, being like a very angsty moody middle schooler. I don't think I like had the ability to really process like this is it. I just was like, this, I have a gift and this opportunity like has arisen, and I feel like God like has opened this opportunity, and my family felt the same way. um but the weight of it, I don't think I like really grasped that.
Yeah, because I was going to say that's, a fairly young age to make like I guess a move like that or a decision like that, and that's great that you discovered it at that age because you just got a head start on you know on your life generally to develop that gift as early as possible. But like, how did that, I guess, shape your like your teenage years? Because like your friend circle and the people that you were surrounded with, obviously, I can only imagine that they weren't going through kind of similar sorts of things. So like, I wonder how that kind of weaved into your personal life and like shaped that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question too. I would say like, because it was interesting because I started like with the school system here, I started going to public high school for my like freshman, like ninth and 10th grade. And so because I was in a completely new city altogether, it was like everything was starting from scratch. And so I made a couple friends, and I was like, of course, like I'm a very friendly person. And the second that you like talk about music, people get like excited about like something interesting or that's like out of the ordinary. Um, but I will say, like, because I was also working, I feel like I have a very old soul. So my friends honestly became the people that I was like working with. So I'd like I would go to school for a couple hours and then I would have to leave. And then I would go to different writing sessions mid morning, and I would be working with people that were much older than me for like the rest of the day. And then I'd go home and like do school or whatever. And so I really fell in love with like kicking it and having a great like philosophical conversation over a cup of coffee. I'm like 14, 15. And I'm like, this couldn't be better. So I think as far as like, there's aspects that I didn't feel like I was missing out on the like the youthful experience, which I don't know if that's bad. I missed, but I did have a few like close friends that are still very close from that time. And um yeah, so it definitely like I was not lacking in interaction with people, so I guess that definitely helped as far as like having social opportunities to where it was not like, yeah, i guess I'm not, yeah, good opportunities to like have friends, and even as a young person, even whether they were younger or older.
Yeah, I'm similar sort of way. Like I feel like as someone who isn't old soul, if you want to use that label, I guess it's probably the best label to use when you relate to people who are like much older than you. And it kind of feels weird at first because you're like, oh, am I just like the odd one out? Like it doesn't make sense. But then after a while, you realize you're just more comfortable around people who've just matured and are at a different stage in life, and it's almost like you're at that stage but trapped in a young person, well, I wouldn't even say trapped, but like incarnated in a young person's body. And we've probably had all those youthful experiences many times before in different lifetimes, and so now is time to like experience a different part of the journey. And naturally people who are biologically older than us can help guide the way, because they've been on earth much longer. So like you, I enjoy many cups of coffee and tea and drinks and talking about this kind of stuff rather than just going out and, I don't know, not that there's anything wrong with like partying and doing all the normal stuff, like, but to me, having long conversations about this stuff and just going off in my imagination about everything and anything in the universe is like that's like where I am right now. And I feel like a lot of the creativity is fueled through those conversations because I get a lot of inspiration from exchange of energy, just like we're doing now, or through just like regular conversations with like friends on the phone, and we're talking about certain things. I'm like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And then ideas start coming to you, and you just start feeling a different way. And I think what becomes more important as you get to know more of yourself, or become closer to who you really are, then you realize that you want to surround yourself with a certain type of energy most of the time, and kind of keep a boundary to other types of energy, just because, I don't know, you respect yourself more and what you're trying to achieve and the direction that you're going in life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And I think, yeah, I think there's opportunity to definitely like learn from every experience. And there's something you can learn from every interaction that you have with people. But then as far as what you surround yourself in with your inner circle, or what your friendships are, to have an understanding of like what is going to be a healthy, like these are the kind of relationships that I really treasure or want to invest in more. And that like you can have a ton of friends and have a ton of relationships, and then that like kind of inner like your really close relationships, that number ends up being very small. I literally and I kind of talked about that with my mom the other day. I was like, I feel like I have a lot of friends, but then like when it really comes down to it, like if I had to put down on a piece of paper like who I would go to if I was desperate, I think that would be like three people. And
So
that's
then you
totally
realize, actually, I've only got a few real friends now I think
yes.
about it. So
Yeah,
no,
and I think
I
that
resonate with
it's
that.
normal. I think that's normal, but there's something I like hear what you're saying. I think there's something that you can learn from everybody, but then also having like a healthy boundary of these are the kinds of people that I really want to spend time with, because we we are influencing people constantly, and we are being influenced by people. And I think we can have good boundaries, and do our best to be like positive influence, but it's definitely there's a lot flying around for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, I think you can just learn from everyone and every experience that you have. So, and
Mhm.
that's a perspective and an attitude that I guess you can adopt, and choose to see the world that way, so that you feel like no interaction or no experience was really wasted. It's just all learning experience from birth to death. It's just like everything is learning. It's like it's all fun to some extent, because you're just learning what it's like and remembering what it's like to be human, if you believe you were
Yeah.
here many times before, which I think it's probably possible. If you're an old soul, you've probably been here many times before. So you feel like, let's just skip the boring part and get straight to it. So,
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
but I think, I guess what would be interesting to kind of talk about is your first, I guess, collection of music album. I think it was called Svrcina, right? And that
Yes.
included some of the songs I was talking about earlier that I stumbled across, and one of them being
Yeah.
Astronomical, which is definitely one of my favorites. It's still up there. So it'd be cool to kind of talk a little bit about how that came to fruition, and I guess where you were in your life at that time, and like what influenced the lyrics. Because I was listening back to the lyrics, and I was like, oh, I wonder what was going through like her heart at that time to kind of bring those words to life.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a project I don't get a chance to talk about too much either. So that's like really, really wonderful. Thank you for asking. I that project, so I have been working as an independent artist for quite some time. And so I met my manager that I'm working with now, um, when I was 18. And so we did like a small EP together, and then the Sur-Cee-Nah project was like a follow-up of that. And so with the first project that we did, it was more of an experimentation on this like very cinematic pop. And after that, like trying to figure out where to go from here, I I was still like, because I had transitioned out of high school and into college, and then I was taking virtual. I finished high school virtually, and then started university also virtually, because the whole arc of everything was that I was always creating music and always working. And it was interesting, like in that patch of being like 17, 18, like everything that I was doing just really like totally dried up, like a raisin. I was like, I very narrowly quit music. I was like, I'm about to go to school proper and just like do something with business. I feel like I am like wandering. And so I think there was a lot of spillover of that feeling, and just kind of walking through um, university and then feeling very isolated, um, with doing school like at the kitchen table. I would spend hours at the kitchen table, and then just I was by myself a lot. And so then also, but I was starting to work with my manager, and she was really wonderful and like has taken me under her wing in a really beautiful way. And so we're like at the first glimmers of like figuring out our working relationship and just trying different things. And so um, coming off of my first EP, we started to like kind of experiment more with like ambient sonically and kind of more in the pop space, but still had like ethereal cinematic elements, but really kind of simplified a lot. And so I had really one song called Island that I had written when I was 17 that was kind of the starting point of wanting to experiment with just a little bit of a different style. And so as a result of that, the project kind of unfolded and was more of like a patchwork quilt of experimenting with different things sonically, while I was kind of just going through a little bit of a dark time personally and just feeling very lonely and trying to figure out like who I was as a young person.
Yeah, I think that cinematic sound definitely comes across in that first collection of music, and I feel like that's kind of what drew me to it, because there's a level of depth in that music as well. That's just like pouring with emotion, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's where I was in my life at that time as well. It was not too long ago actually, but I could just
Oh,
feel like um, how your journey was reflective of that music, because you can't create something like that without experiencing the emotion. Like, it's an expression of emotion, and you can't
mm-hmm.
fake that. It's like it's either there or it's not there, and you have to try and express that. Like for me, I express it through words on paper, and for you it's a similar way, and then obviously it comes through in your voice and in your sound. Like, were there any like particular um favorites or even challenging songs in that collection that you kind of recall?
Yeah, I I do have a couple of favorites. One of them I would say is definitely Island. I think even though it's like on the sadder end of the spectrum, it was definitely like marking at that time. It was probably one of the most personal, um, yeah, probably one of the most personal songs that I have written. And I started that one on the piano, and I don't like play piano very often. But I like had this idea and passed it to another songwriter that I had worked with when I was doing country music, actually. And he helped. It was literally like he read my mail and helped me like finish the song. And it just kind of the internal tension that I was experiencing with even like with the trajectory of my life, my relationship with God, like all of that was very, it's become a very like special song. And then with that, there's another song called Steady that it's kind of in that same vein of just feeling very heavy or like weighed down by just a lot of things that I was wrestling with. But it's one of my favorites, mostly because of the creative process, which the first writing trip that I took outside of the US, I had like started in China for the study abroad trip. And then I thought it was on the way back, which not at all. That was like dumb. But I was like, I'll just go to London on the way back. And so, like my publisher and my manager, they helped set up a writing trip. And so I think it was it was maybe it was the second trip to London. I don't remember. But it totally like was one of the first like international trips. And so I connected with a few songwriters and artists. One is a top liner. Her name is Gabby Feldman, from London. And then another artist, his name is Blinky. And I literally fell in love with them with my whole heart and soul. And so the creative process with them, and I've worked with Gabby many times after that session, but it was very much like a heart connection with those people that made it so special.
What does a creative process look like for you? What if you were to like kind of put to words your experience as you're kind of putting a song together, with like putting lyrics to paper, or like in the studio recording, like what does that look like from, I guess, from the beginning to like the finished product? And is it different every
Yeah,
time?
it can be different every time. I would say like sometimes I'll have like a songwriting session on my calendar and it will be everybody in the same room and we're all starting from scratch. And the best combination for me has been a producer in the room and another top liner in the room. So somebody that is like kind of creating the instrumental and the music, and then somebody else that I can bounce melody and lyric and concept ideas with. And sometimes there's a great synergy with all of there usually is a great synergy with all of it. And then with those, like I'll try to prepare. Sometimes I'll come up with like a melody because that's usually helpful because I'm a very melodic person. So I'll do some brainstorming beforehand and do that way. I've started with just like a song title before and people have rolled with me. There's a song called Flowers that I released that on my drive to that session, I was like very convicted about writing a song called Flowers. And so the the fellas that were in that session, they were very gracious to roll with me on that one. Um, and then it's interesting because Gabby, the top liner I was talking about, we've like written so many different, I feel like every form of writing that you could do, we've done. So we've written a song entirely via email slash Google document and literally just going back and forth. And this is pre-COVID. We wrote a song together called Insecure that was literally like you could see the trail on our Google document and then through email of all of our like changes and how we developed the song. We've written on WhatsApp, just sent voice memos back and forth. So every song is different. There's no one right way to go about it, and I think it also kind of depends on who you're working with and the best way that uh, your chemistry and synergy together works.
Yeah, it's important to have the right energy in the room. And is it the same for yourself? Like if you're creating something on your own, it's a similar sort of process. You're just trying to record like bits of voice notes or just jotting stuff down on paper. Like, what does it look like when you're kind of doing that on your own?
Yeah, I mean I'm mostly co-write, so I find that for the most part, I will like sit down and either sit with just at the piano and then come up with a bunch of different ideas on like I have Logic that I can jot down like a rough idea. But it usually like even then, even if I were to have like three-quarters of a song done, it usually ends up kind of getting presented in a co-writing session. And that's not necessarily like I could finish it, but I do find the value, I guess, in being able to like other people's perspectives. And I think that's probably just for me. I can get it to a certain threshold, but I always feel like the second that I present it and give it to another collaborator, it automatically gets better. So um, I will sit down and like play the piano, come up with melodies and concept, and write like a verse and chorus kind of thing. And then it will usually get passed.
Are there any songs right now that you've got which you haven't finished but want to finish?
Yes, I do have. I do have a couple, and I'm like, there's like a few that I'm torn that I'm like, can I finish it myself? I'm like, I probably could, but it literally that's like chiseling a sculpture. I'm like, this is gonna be a while. This is this might be a piece of life work. I don't know. Like if I die, if this is the one song that I can hang my hat on, it might be this one. So I do have like at least like two or three or something in that space.
Are there any that are never going to see the light of day?
Oh, there's plenty. Oh my lord. Yes. I sometimes like if my iTunes are on shuffle, I literally have tons of entertainment by myself because there are so many songs, especially when I was like younger, that are just very interesting. I did write I did write a song like about Joan of Arc. I wrote a song about like um my best friend when I was like 10 or 11. There's definitely a lot that are pretty rotten that will not have the opportunity to hit Spotify, which is all for the best.
What I guess, just thinking about now, like as you were talking, is like I feel like your energy is super, like, what's the word I can use? Like loving, and bouncy, and light, and like it feels like you're the same on air as you are off. Like whenever you're on like stage, for example, or like you're in this conversation, or you're in the studio, like, and off air, it's like exactly the same. Like it was that ever a thing for you where you were like, I'm fighting with my personality, like how do I show up and how much of myself do I bring to my work versus how much do I keep for myself because I don't want everyone to know this side of me? Like how, what's that battle, or maybe it's not a battle, like what's that situation been like, or that experience?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I mean, that's a very kind thing to say. So thank you for that.
I could just, by the way, before you get into that, I could just pick that up from the IG lives that you did. I know you've like posted a few of them, and I was just like skipping through, like watching some of like the stuff that you were responding to when people were like sending messages on the live, and I just
Mhm.
felt that, like that energy from you, and I was like, this is someone who's like legit, like she seems really
Oh,
like I don't even know you, and it's just weird saying that, but I just get that feeling that it's just like someone who is really the same on and off camera, even without knowing you. Um, and
well.
you're probably going to be biased and say, yeah, that is me, but I'm just curious to hear
Yeah.
what your thoughts
Well,
are.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, and it's like super. It's seriously super kind. So thank you very much. I it's I haven't like really thought about this like super in depth, I guess, but it's I have found like in general, I am a very joyful person, and so I very much love life. I have like yeah, I very much love life. I sometimes my thoughts told me like not too long ago, she's like, sometimes I hear you laughing by yourself. I'm like, oh dear, I think I'm probably I don't know what I'm thinking about, but it's usually something joyful. And so that would be like, I would say that's true. Now I will say there have been patches where it's like just been like a huge like down like valley kind of internally, and I think it goes, I mean, life is not easy, so there's just different times in life that can really throw you for a loop. And so I definitely have had patches of just like kind of sitting in like a deep sadness, which I think that, I mean, whatever pain or whatever that is, that's helpful for creativity. I have noticed that when I am like a little bit scared or like frightened, or like really nervous, which uh yeah, that definitely happens sometimes, I start to get like very quiet, and it's not really on purpose. I'm kind of like listening and then also trying to like not make any sudden moves, or like I don't really know how to navigate, but I'm like, so I end up, what would be like a normally joyful person would be very just like kind of
Just a
just like
silent witness,
chilling
just
there
sit in
and
the
just,
background,
but
fly on the wall.
yeah, and so it's usually when I'm like really nervous, but then it's interesting because then later on I'll remember like a bajillion different like tiny details of that experience. And so I'm like, I was there clearly, but I didn't say very much. And then sometimes I can feel myself like when I'm talking too much. And so I'm like, I think I've reached the threshold. I think I've reached the quota of words that I should be allowed to say. Like, I should probably stop talking. So, um, yeah. So, but in general, I'm very like joyful.
What do you think like um makes you so joyful?
I I mean, I can honestly say that my relationship with God has been what has like it is like the true source of every ounce of joy that I have, and just like knowing him, and yeah, just like having that assurance that God loves me, that I am like created in his image, and that I can be the person that he created me to be. And then like when I think about him or think about his word, and I'm a Christian, and so I do very much, I would say that that has been like the biggest influence as a source of joy, because life circumstances are not always joyful or happy. And I've definitely had some seasons where I've like really hit a very low point, and honestly, very even pretty recently. But by the grace of God, like he pulled me out of that very quickly when it was like super dark. And so even though there's like an ebb and flow with life, like if you zoom out and see the big picture, he's like helped me be very stable, very constant, and be able to have joy in life, just through that relationship. And um, so yeah, I would say that is definitely a huge thing.
And how do you maintain that like faith during the valleys or like the dark times?
Yes, I one thing that has become very important for me is like really cultivating like a personal relationship with God. So I will spend time in the morning. I'll like read my Bible. Prayer has like been super essential. Um, and learning how to trust God with things that I don't necessarily understand. And I can have all of these questions or overthink certain things, but learning to ultimately surrender to Him has been like hugely helpful to it, where it's not like I'm tied like a pretzel. And I'm like trying to carry all of these heavy weights myself. So having that personal relationship has helped me kind of go of things that I don't need to carry because he can carry them. And then also having like other people in my life that are wise counselors. And again, like we talked a little bit earlier, having relationships with people that are older than you are wonderful to kind of help you process through difficult things in life. So all of those things are very helpful to kind of walk through a dark valley to where it can put a ton of pressure, but it doesn't crush you completely. And I definitely have found that to be true.
I feel like during the darkest times as well, when you take a moment just to breathe, when you're through all the panic, when you feel like you're drowning at least, take a moment to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
You realize, well, I realized for me anyway, that your faith is being strengthened during that time, regardless of what God means to you, or like whatever face you want to put to that name, or religion you want to put to that name, or whatever it is. It's just generally a faith in something that's beyond and inclusive of you. Like you're part of something that's not just allowing you to walk on your own. You're walking in the grace of something, and
Yeah.
to have faith in that during the darkest time, because when it's the dark, quite literally you can't see, and I feel like internally that's when the most of the chaos is happening, because you can't see. But like, as I was reflecting, I guess one of my recent dark periods has been kind of 2019 and a lot of 2020, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest, just reflecting on stuff and coming to the realization that during that whole period, though I kind of slowed down in my creative process of physically creating content, making connections, and doing what I was doing. My faith was being strengthened throughout that. So basically, before and after, I was an entirely different person because the perspective I'd had and my approach to
Wow.
certain situations is very different to the way it was. And so I thought, wow, okay, maybe darkness does have a purpose. And so I wrote actually one of the letters or poems, whatever you want to call it, in the book is Dear Darkness, and I wrote about it as if I was talking to the dark directly about like my relationship with it and what it's given me. So I
Wow.
think there's many ways to see the periods that we go through as like things that either benefit us or they don't benefit us, because really it's like whatever meaning you want to give it. Like there is no set principle or rule that says this life experience equals this or this life experience equals that. Like you can make up whatever meaning you want to give to every experience, and that's where kind of freedom comes from, being in a structure, because like the internal freedom is I can choose how I want to see this particular situation. Like it's up to me. And then in that
Yeah.
moment, you're just like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like I can choose to see it however I want to see it. You might forget that sometimes,
Yeah.
but I think that's quite a liberating kind of feeling.
Yes. Yes. Knowing that you have a choice and that you don't have to stay. And even if the circumstances themselves don't seem to shift right away, to lift your eyes above your circumstances and to see from a different perspective in order to get through them. And uh, just kind of true to what you're saying in a lot of ways. It was interesting. I keep referencing my mom, and my mom is a wonderful lady. I'm like, she's the greatest. I'm like, she's definitely been a huge like influence in my life, and I just like respect her a ton as somebody that has gone, like honestly, experienced a great deal of suffering, and has maintained uh, faith in a great deal of what doesn't make sense, or a great deal of crushing. And so she shared this morning, it's in the Bible, it's in like it's a verse, but it says, consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure your faith life is forced into the open and it shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well developed, not deficient in any way. And it's so true that the things that we experience, and she literally sent that this morning, so it's very pertinent to her conversation. It's very true that the difficult low valleys that we face, they seriously, they, it depends on how you look at it, but they are an opportunity to develop perseverance and kind of resistance training of building muscle within, um, and ultimately helping us become more, hopefully more mature people, if we don't let it make us bitter.
Yeah, and it takes a level of self-reflection to realize that as well. Just taking the time to reflect on your journey, and then you see how the
Yeah.
dots were connected and kind of the meaning that you choose to give the
Yeah.
experience that you had. Because in the moment, necessarily, you don't have those epiphanies, and you don't, feel like, oh, thank you, God, like this is amazing. I'm in the dark and I feel hopeless. It's just that's not what you
Right,
think in the
right,
moment
right.
necessarily.
No, no,
So
no. And I don't think you like, it's like one of those things where you're like, thank you for the darkness. I don't think it's ever really that, because like that's horrible. It's like really on the other side of it, you can thank God that he was with you in that.
yeah.
And he can help you push through and get out of it. But yeah,
Did
so
your
good.
parents have influence on you in terms of your faith?
They definitely did. I would say my mom specifically was probably the greatest influence of faith, and being somebody that claimed to believe one thing and who they really were was exactly what they said. And I'm forever grateful for that example of, and then like as I've gotten older and she's shared more of her story, it's like kind of like have to put your like teeth back in your head as to like how much she's been through, and to like her perspective on life, and how strong her faith is. And so that really from a very young age marked me and continues to like, I really respect her. for it. And then I think the thing with that is like, of course, as you're an adult or you get older, you have to still make those decisions on your own. So in that like patch of 17, 18, I was like transitioning into young adulthood, there was a lot of like, it was very like excruciating internally of kind of transitioning in out of, okay, this is how I grew up and I've believed this, and like my family's had a huge influence on me, and I think I have to like really come to a conclusion on my own, of where do I stand with all of this, because at the end of the day it's not going to be, um we're all in like a group consensus at the end of our life, where each like we get to have a representation of our own life individually. And so I definitely had a great deal of internal wrestle, especially like at the end of the teen years, um, which I don't know. Sidebar, I'm sorry. We have like a cuckoo clock, so
I could hear
I
that. I
don't
was
know.
like, where is that coming from?
Yeah, sorry. I guess it's better to just like bring that one out in the
Yeah,
open.
yeah.
We have a
I do
cuckoo
that.
clock.
I do that all the time. I just bring it out because there's no
Okay.
point hiding it. But yeah, I heard
Yeah,
that. I was
definitely
like, is
not
that a
like
movie playing in the background or?
nope, that's just a clock, and I it brings a great deal of joy. It's a good thing this podcast is not at 12,
uh,
because we would have to pause for that thing to go to town. Um, but yes, so I definitely would say my family has had an influence on me. I've observed things that have like caused me to question and really like take that to with my relationship with God and faith, and really do some digging, um, and yeah, really draw a conclusion for myself. But my mom especially had a great influence for sure.
so just going like kind of past your first collection of work, I guess the next two pieces of work that came out were like Hearing Colors, and then your most recent one. I hope I don't butcher it. It's Elysian Fields. Is that right? Or have I said that
It is
correctly?
Elysian Fields.
Elysian. Okay.
And yes, which to tell you the truth, I said my own album name wrong for a little bit, so it's okay. I took some inspiration from it was actually like the definition of Elysian and like online, but I didn't really grasp fully how to pronounce that either. So, but we got it now. It's Elysian Fields, so we're good.
Yeah, we got it now. So, um, yeah. So like, I guess just the names of those albums are fascinating and piqued my curiosity because Hearing Colors, that's like you involving two different senses at once. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's just like the names of things, the labels that we give things are reflective of like how we're feeling at the time. So it's like a mixture of emotion and a mixture of creativity. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know, I just get that feeling. So I just want to know like what kind of
totally.
brought that up for you. And then obviously the most recent one as well, which is more like Elysian Fields being something that's more open and spacious and freedom and joy and like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Have I just, am I on the
Yeah.
mark, off the mark? Like,
You are, yeah, I was just gonna tell you, I'm like, you're nailing it, my friend. This is like so good. And even as you're talking, I'm like having moments of like remembering kind of what the spark of each of those were. So yeah, you're crushing it. So yeah, with Hearing Color, what is, and just kind of even thinking about that progression, I'm so like so grateful, because I think the more that time has gone on, the lighter I've my music has gotten in a creative sense, and then also in a personal sense that would totally be true. So it was like Hearing Color was kind of marking this season of finally like kind of breaking through just all of this heaviness that I've just felt like under so much weight mentally, emotionally, and internally. And while I was creating Hearing Color, I started to feel like really inspired, and I was really loving what I was creating. I fell in love with the people that I was working with. Like always love them, but I just like was meeting new people, and like I just was enjoying the creative process, and I don't think that I really, there was always like a sense of turmoil, I guess, internally with the creative process, or feeling like I'm trying to like figure out who I am, and it's like nothing, I'm still trying to figure it out. And so there's just kind of like a lightness with Hearing Color, and then moving into Elysian Fields, like even more so. And so it kind of, with Elysian Fields, kind of opened up into this blossoming of like love and like having peace in whatever circumstance. And there's a couple songs in there that kind of contrast like having difficult circumstances, but like kind of the imagination as a means of still having hope even through difficult circumstances. So even if you're going through a hard time, the landscape is very beautiful, and still hoping for the future, and all of that. So it is interesting how the progression is like, my heart is feeling lighter, and so it is overflowing into my music. So yeah, it's interesting that you definitely like pegged it.
Yeah, because you can see that through, as you just said, like through those collections of music that you put out. Like that's kind of reflection of where you were emotionally and mentally and spiritually. Like that was pouring into your work, and then the names and the ideas and the sound, like that all shifts as you shift as well. And that's what I was saying at the beginning. It's super interesting to have it documented, which obviously you've done. So it's nice
Yeah.
to look back and see, oh wow, like this was my journey, and it's pretty cool to reflect on what was going on at that time, and just to see your journey as
Yeah.
it's progressing and unfolding. Like where else does the joy come from if not from growth, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what's so cool to see is the growing journey. um
Yeah.
but yeah, like I know you also talked about, when we were going back and forth on email, we're talking about like creative vision and developing that and exploring ideas and all that kind of stuff. So talk to me about that, like what's going on in your heart space about that.
Yeah, so I always get like super excited about this, and it kind of ties back into the chalkboard wall, kind of. So over time, like as I've been super inspired, I'm like very passionate about bringing intentionality into creativity, and so, ev- of course, I like to have, as an artist, to like have somewhat of a trampoline to be able to bounce off of, and even if it goes in an interesting direction, just to like have a template or a creative vision to help set direction, so then at the end you can have this like cohesive body of work. And that was one thing that has been an area of to like really dig into, because I felt like previously I had like the projects as a whole, you could hear it was very experimental. So over time, there's like a thread of cohesiveness that has gotten refined little by little. And so something that I've found to be helpful has been to like come up with like a creative planning sheet, like at the front of a project. And the more our team gets dialed in with our working process together, I've found it's been like super useful. And so I'll usually like brainstorm like different themes that I'm interested in touching and covering, and then maybe some like song title options or songs that I already have that could be contenders for that project. And then I like kind of made up this aesthetic word bank, and so there's like all these different pieces that have been helpful to like set a template, and then different tools have been helpful for different either writing sessions or when it comes time to put together visuals for the project. um, so it's been really exciting to like experiment, and I think the the clearest that I've ever been was with the Elysian Fields project. And I did have like, it was interesting because I'd created a project planning sheet in maybe the end of 2018, 2019, and then kind of had the colors that we were going after, like the pastel vibe, and then the themes. And then I didn't reference it like super consistently. But then at the end of the project, I looked back at it, and one by one, I could literally check off every single theme that I had put down on the sheet. I was like, this is like amazing. Like, I set out to do something, and I wasn't like obsessed with checking it, but the vision by having something written down and kind of brainstorming beforehand really helped set a lane and a direction, for the whole thing. Um, so I get very excited, and like, as time goes on, there's different ways of exploring and experimenting. And I set the chalkboard wall because with the project I'm working on right now, one of the like sunflower seeds of like inspiration, I was sitting down and I was like doing some journaling, and I like got super convicted all of a sudden, and I literally just saw this like classroom like paper tree. And so it was like very random, but I was like if you have like kindergarten or like children, like school for children, and I was like, sometimes teachers have like very creative things on the wall, and so I was like, I need to go to a teacher store and I need to find a tree. And then this is going to help me brainstorm. And I went to a teacher store that was closing. It totally was closing. So it was on the last leg of being in business. And I totally found exactly what I was looking for. It came with all of these like cutout leaves. And so I put that on the wall and then started developing the concept, because the project is called Orchards. And so that was like a visual tool to like paste on the wall to start brainstorming, and the leaves at one point were like meant to be like the different themes of each. And then I bought fake fruit. So I'm
You
like,
have
the
to do what
creative
you have to do.
you have to do. This sounds like very childish, but I was like, the creative process shouldn't be boring. So even if this is just for my enjoyment to help kind of like spark the like initial ideas, of course I'm not gonna like bring my paper leaves into my writing sessions. It's just to like establish
Bring a
I
fruit
guess an
basket to the
aesthetic.
studio.
Yes, exactly. Which is not out of the realm of, I don't know, future sessions. I could bring some snacks for
so,
everybody.
so I'm thinking, right, like the first collection of work was the soil.
Yeah.
The second collection was like you coming out of the soil, just sprouting a little bit and realizing actually there's some
Hey.
senses here. And then you realize, oh, there's a whole field here. Like I could be friends with the whole field. I can expand. Like it's not just this space. And orchards, it's funny you picked that name. The first thing that came to mind is now you're blossoming. Now you're beginning to grow. Like, you know what? This whole place is my playing field. I'm comfortable with it. I'm just going to grow and see what can happen if
Wow.
I have the confidence to grow. It was just funny just connecting those dots like as you were talking. So when you said orchards, I was like, okay, there's no
Amazing.
surprise there.
That's so cool. I literally have never thought about it like that. So that's very encouraging and like very consistent, with kind of that metaphor and that visual of constant growth. And um yeah, that's so cool. Oh, I love that. I'm gonna like give that a hug. Like, I'm gonna roll with that one. I love it. It's
More
so
trees
good.
and more leaves.
Yes, more trees. Yes. When I kind of redid my room, and my mom, like, because I'm living with my mama, and she was like, she highly recommended getting rid of the tree, and I was like, well, this is tragic. I love my mom more than I love this childish tree, but I like I think I will get rid of it. But yeah, so I haven't had that for a while, but my creative visual inspiration spilled over into Pinterest. And so I literally that's been interesting too, because I ended up creating kind of like a mood board for every single song that's on the project. And that's been another really, really awesome tool that has been found to be helpful with anything kind of like social media, graphics, and then with I worked with Brie Marie Fish a lot, who's in Nashville, and she's a videographer and a photographer. And so we've kind of developed a great synergy together on a visual sense, and she like has helped kind of bring together all of my interesting ideas to life. And so like having like this aesthetic board has been very helpful to for her to take and kind of run with on her end as well, for video work or photos or anything like that. So and then ultimately kind of what, again, like what we set out to do ends up usually being like 75,000 times better than I like could have imagined when I started like just kind of planning.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just curious, like, do you, like, now looking back on your journey, if you were to have like a mini me approach you and, like, ask you about advice, like, looking back, obviously everything happened for a reason, it's got you to where you are today, but if you were to give advice to someone who's just starting on their journey, doesn't necessarily have to be singing or music, but like they're trying to find themselves or find that creative spark or their gift, if you will, what would you
Mm-hmm.
say um that they should look out for or think about or experience or like dive into?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think one of the biggest things that um, has stuck out to me for my journey is like honestly just kind of keeping open hands for, you can think you have an idea of the way that you want your life to go, or maybe you don't know at all. Um, but to really have open hands and kind of, if you can, maybe like, especially if you're like a teenager or a young adult, or kind of find a common thread of what have people said, or what kind of encouragement have I gotten from people over the years, and kind of take that as like a little bit of a cue, maybe of maybe this is something I'm really great at, or something that I should explore a little bit more. But then to have like an open palette and open hands for things to go in a twist of a direction that maybe you didn't think of. And I would say that those, just for the sake of example, those two things have played out in my own life, in that I can find like a consistent thread back to when I was very, very young, that people always encouraged me with singing or music or something in that capacity. But what it's turned into, I could think, if I had what I thought when I was 10, I would be wearing a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and I would be singing country music, which that clearly has not happened. And so I've been flexible, like, to how the journey itself unfolds, and then just um, I really believe God has brought opportunities, and some of the best opportunities and relationships that I've developed over time have been things that I literally, they never crossed my mind. Um, Songwriting never crossed my mind when the publisher like reached out and said you should come to Nashville. I never knew that Nashville existed. And so, but that was like a spark that was like, huh, maybe we should have that away. And so it's an opportunity to like step out in faith. Um, and that has happened so many times. When I met my manager, I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I just knew I needed help. And that was literally such a huge gift. So I think being open to the direction of your journey, but then also kind of looking for that common thread of things that you are gifted in, or where people have encouraged you or affirmed a certain aspect of who you are, and really use that as like a clue, some clues for maybe like a blueprint of your life.
Yeah, I resonate with that 100%, and I think I had to do something similar for myself. I don't think I've fully figured out or found who I am, but there's definitely layers that I've discovered which I wasn't able to kind of live in that space before, because I just didn't know they existed. But looking back, it was like similar for me. It was quite funny. I looked back at some of the reports I got from school, like school teachers, and what they said about me as well. And I always used to get in trouble and sent out in class for distracting people for talking. So I'm like, okay, well, it's no surprise I started a podcast and I love speaking to people. and then and then my
There you go.
and then writing as well.
That's
Obviously,
amazing.
just written a book, poetry book, but English and history were like my top subjects. I just loved writing, and yeah, like just small clues like that kind of got me thinking about where my strengths are. And I think it's really about strengths and society as a whole, or I guess some of the messages we get along our journey is more about kind of strengthen your weakness rather than strengthen your strength, if that kind of makes sense. And I don't know, I like the idea of finding what your strengths are, because we all have different strengths, um, and we should kind of find
Yeah,
what that is and just go all in on that, because that's where our gift is. Instead of wasting time trying to prove that we're good at our weaknesses or that we can polish them up. To some extent, that might be useful if
that's
it's
so
going to
good.
feed into your journey, but then we kind of get mixed up and spend time finding approval in, oh, I'm perfect at this thing too. But it's like, you're not. Just forget that. Just leave it to a side. Let the person who's gifted with that do that thing, and you focus on what you're good at, because we're all
Totally.
good at different things. So
Totally.
yeah.
That's so good. And what is interesting about that too is I think you may not be like totally off the mark with the realm that you're in. It might just be like a couple degree shift of somebody like I guess an example would be like with the music industry, somebody could think that they want to be an artist, and then the more they dive into it they discover this is like maybe not totally what I'm good at or like that I'm best at, but I love the music business. And so there's like so many different things that you could do, and kind of being giving yourself the opportunity to be honest with yourself, um, and then kind of explore, okay, this is what I'm good at. So you may not be like totally off the mark, like, oh, I thought I was going to be an artist and um I'm really a like aeronautical scientist. That I mean that may be the case, I don't know, but you could be just like a couple degrees off, and just by being like having your hands open and not clenching to a particular thing that you think, I think there's so much more opportunities to grow in your strengths. And then also I think just as a result some of the weaker areas may like come up a bit.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I love the way you explain that. I think that's a good way for us to wrap up our conversation as well, because I'm just conscious of the time, and I feel like there's probably going to be another conversation to be had when you've released your next project, to see kind of how you're feeling and how you've evolved. And I'm just excited to hear like what's going to be on that project as well, in terms of the song and the vibe and the music and the lyrics and how it all comes together. Like, is there a release date set for that?
There is, I don't remember the exact date. We've released one single so far, and then we'll release a couple singles, but the full piece will be in uh, somewhere in October. So it will be a good 2021 release for sure. And I'm so excited. So we'll definitely be announcing soon. And I'm so thankful for our conversation. You like asked amazing questions and are very, very intuitive, very dialed in, and I like really appreciate it and conversation. And I would love to do a follow up once Orchards is out into the airwaves for sure.
Yeah, yep,
Yes.
definitely. I think so too. And yeah, I loved your energy as well. Thank you for bringing your energy to today's conversation. I feel like you brought a lot of yourself, and I'm excited to see what else there is as the months roll by towards the end of the year. So, thanks again, and I will
Yes.
connect with
Thank you,
you
Pete.
later in the year. Thanks.